Ouagadougou Sana AM. The pink light at the secure line blinked, cutting through the silence of the presidential workplace like a warning siren. On the other, give up of the call, changed into not a routine diplomat, now not a cautious best friend, but Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu himself. His phrases were cold, sharp, and unmistakably final. You have 48 hours. Step down or be eliminated. The ultimatum struck like a thunderclap. It became not a negotiation, no longer even diplomacy. It became extortion at the best level. Restore Israeli mining contracts. Re-establish the surveillance partnerships. Reverse each decision that threatened Tel Aviv's hobbies in Burkina Faso. 48 hours to obey or to be destroyed, to escape the U.S. like a coward, or to surrender the presidency to foreign arms. For Israel, it becomes supposed as a simple equation: strain, compliance, manipulate. But they miscalculated throughout the Sahel. One leader changed into not organized to kneel. By daring to deliver this ultimatum, Netanyahu had set in movement a confrontation that would ignite a whole continent, rework a state's humiliation into defiance, and flip a nighttime phone call into a countdown that the world could in no way forget about. The silence after Netanyahu's phrases did not final long. Within the hour, lights flickered on throughout the presidential compound. Guards tightened their perimeter. Inside the warfare room, the defense minister, intelligence chief, and overseas affairs advisor amassed around the extensive desk. Traoré entered, closing, his uniform nevertheless marked with the aid of the creases of a sleepless night. He placed the steady handset at the table, a weapon of a different kind. The room absorbed the load of the recording. Netanyahu's voice echoing threats promising whole destruction if Burkina Faso did not yield. This isn't always diplomacy, the protection minister stated grimly. It is regime alternate. The intelligence leader showed what the president had lengthy suspected. For weeks that they had traced uncommon satellite TV for PC moves, unexplained cyber probes, suspicious capital transfers. These were the fingerprints of guidance, no longer debate, but overthrow. Destabilization, financial war, orchestrated chaos. The alternatives had been stark. Capitulate and wish for mercy, or resist. Knowing resistance could trigger a storm a ways greater than their modest navy and fragile economy. May want to resist. Yet the president's answer came swiftly. Never, he stated. And with that, Burkina Faso chose a defiance. But defiance by myself become not a approach. Traoré walked to a wall map of his landlocked US of A. The borders outlined like fragile seams within the Sahel. 22 million people. No nuclear arsenal. No superpower allies. No leverage except one: the refusal to kneel. Sometimes refusal is sufficient, he stated. But in this case, refusal wished allies. Phones have been lifted, steady strains activated. Caracas became the primary name. Maduro Lisund then offered political sanctuary if the ultimatum have become exile. Thran became next. Iran promised cyber defenses against the digital onslaught. Israel became already getting ready. Moscow accompanied. The Kremlin signaled willingness to send advisors if the crisis tipped in the direction of military confrontation. Beijing closed the loop, providing economic aid to plug the inevitable holes left by Western withdrawal. For the primary time in decades, an African leader below risk refused to weather the hurricane on my own, and the gamble was brilliant. Instead of isolation, trade changed into building a network, a counterweight to an ultimatum. The pressure became not only external. By sunrise, word of Netanyahu's demand had leaked into the streets, no longer from Ouagadougou, but from Tel Aviv itself. Israeli officials had bragged of their leverage, in no way looking ahead to the leak to boomerang back into the heart of Africa. Radios crackled with outrage. Market girls folded up their stalls. Students crammed avenues with hand-painted signs. Netanyahu cannot choose our president. Workers abandoned factories to collect on the palace gates, chanting, "We choose Traoré, now not Tel Aviv." By hour 30 of the 48-hour countdown, the ultimatum had inverted its meaning. Instead of worry, it had ignited harmony. Instead of isolation, it had drawn interest across Africa. Emergency classes convened. Regional leaders issued statements, and the African Union weighed the results. If one elected government could be ordered aside, none turned into secure. Netanyahu's calculations were easy. Try to educate others a lesson. But the lesson was backfiring. He was turning into the example. The proof of what takes place while foreign powers nonetheless agree with African sovereignty may be bought or bullied into submission. Hour 36, the assault started out, not with tanks or jets, but with invisible guns, coordinated banking disruptions, Focused energy grid fluctuations, communication, yams, a flood of disinformation. Videos you're faced online displaying Traoré fleeing. Doctorate in foreign studios. False bank bills regarded in Swiss ledgers. Officials were smeared as traitors. Western media rolled out a blitz of headlines. Authoritarianism in Ouagadougou backsliding democracy, all carefully timed to border resistance as tyranny. Jet Burkina's defenses held distributed strength saved hospitals and necessities alive. Encrypted channels remained operational. Every falsehood become dismantled within minds by teams of cyber volunteers spread throughout Africa. The disinformation conflict met in sudden counterforce, a continent unwilling to swallow some other regime trade narrative. The Israeli government escalated over again. At hour 40, Netanyahu known as again, not immediately but through intermediaries, don't make your human beings go through to your pride. The message entreated Traoré respond become blunt. You are trying to dispose of a democratically elected African president for refusing exploitative phrases. Your mistake became forgetting to ask my human beings. Crowds erupted. 48 hours, they shouted in the streets. Try 48 years. We might not be your colony. By now, the crisis had crossed Burkina Faso's borders. Mali's leaders warned, if they could get rid of you, they could cast off any folks. Niger's parliament issued a condemnation of overseas interference. Ghana's delegation pushed for an African Union emergency resolution. Chad raised its alert degree, pledging mutual defense in case of intervention. The ultimatum supposed to isolate was welding the continent together. A phrase whispered in Ouagadougou have become a continental rallying cry. An assault on one is an assault on all. Hour 45, Netanyahu's tone shifted. His foreign minister phoned with softer language, suggesting a collectively useful arrangement, but Traoré could no longer bend. There is not any false impression, he spoke back. Your High Minister gave me 48 hours to step down or face elimination. I chose neither. I chose to face. Tell him the age of dictating terms to African democracies is over. The cutoff date loomed. But something profound had already happened. The 48 hours had converted. No longer a countdown to surrender. It becoming a countdown to records. Hour 46. Ouagadougou had emerged as a stage. Crowds filled every side road, their hazard growing like a drumbeat in opposition to the ultimatum that still hung over the city. Banners stretched throughout intersections. Our sovereignty isn't on the market. On balconies and rooftops, households waved flags into the night air. Even the hum of turbines seemed synchronized to one rhythm. Resistance. Inside the palace, the disaster team tracked each flicker of information. Cyber attacks pulsed like waves designed to exhaust. Electricity dipped, then stabilized. Fabricated resignations regarded on faux news sites best to be debunked within mins. The president's advisors labored via the haze of fatigue, knowing that the battle being waged turned into now not simply on their authorities, but at the very concept of African democracy. They need to show we may be broken, the intelligence leader said quietly. If we preserve, we show something else absolutely. Beyond Burkina Faso, the ripple had already grown to be a hurricane. In Bamako, parliamentarians declared the ultimatum an attack at the Sahel itself. In Niamey, leaders warned of continental sanctions if any outside pressure intervened. In Ara, the African Union convened an emergency consultation, drafting phrases that carried extra weight than guns. An assault on Burkina Faso's sovereignty is an assault on Africa's sovereignty. The continent turned into no longer a set of remoted states. It changed into a wall forming in real time. Hour 47. The cell phone rang once more. This time the voice on the road belonged to Israel's foreign minister. The tone became no longer a blade but velvet. President, he commenced, perhaps we will find a diplomatic solution. Maintain our enterprise partnerships intact. Avoid unnecessary disagreement. Surely a compromise can be reached. The provide became polished, designed to peel away the crowd outdoor and fracture the solidarity inside. But the reaction changed into steel. Towie, flanked by his ministers, spoke no longer best to the caller, but to history itself. Two mistakes have been made, he said. First, threatening a democratic leader. Second, underestimating Africa's reaction. We no longer are trying to find confrontation, but we demand reputation. Burkina Faso's sovereignty is not negotiable. The era of foreign ultimatums is finished. The line went silent. Outside, the chants grew louder. Word of the trade unfolded inside minutes, not by officials, but through whispers carried into the streets. The humans knew their leader had no longer wavered, and so neither could they. Midnight approached. The cutoff date changed into seconds away. Soldiers stood at their posts, weapons equipped. Though no person actually expected tanks to roll in or planes to descend, the attack had already been launched in circuits, in headlines, in markets. What mattered now became persistence. Could a small nation resist 48 hours of concentrated strain from an empire? Could a people stand firm when the charge of defiance changed into uncertainty itself? The answer arrived not with an invasion, however, with absence, no jets, no bombs, no coup makers on the gates. When the clock struck, Tel Aviv became silent and Ouagadougou roared. Traoré stepped onto the balcony, flanked by his cabinet. Below him, tens of lots lifted their fists and flags. His voice carried via loudspeakers, clear and constant. They ordered me to step down. They ordered us to give up our sovereignty. Look round you. I am still here. You are nonetheless unfastened. Burkina Faso nonetheless belongs to its people. The roar that followed appeared to shake the earth itself. The aftermath unfolded like hearth. Newspapers throughout the continent ran headlines affirming 48 hours that modified Africa. Commentators defined it as the moment foreign intimidation lost its inevitability. In Lagos, younger activists painted work of art of clocks putting nighttime. In Nairobi, musicians wrote songs celebrating resistance. Across the diaspora, social media pulsed with one message. If one chief should say no, so may want to others. But the consequences went past symbolism. Within weeks, 3 African states announced reviews of contracts that contained political strain clauses. The African Union drafted and surpassed a resolution condemning ultimatums directed at elected governments. Soon after, a brand new defense framework turned into signed the Ouagadougou Protocol. 23 countries pledged that any coercive ultimatum against one would cause coordinated financial, diplomatic, and, if needed, protection responses. By all of the continent changed into, for the first time, beginning to act as a single protect. Parallel projects extended. Plans for an African monetary union won momentum, moving change in the direction of currencies and systems no longer tied to the West. Engineers laid the groundwork for a continent-wide fiber network unfastened from external routing. Satellites launched underneath a new African consortium promised impartial communications. The ultimatum had meant to fracture. Instead, it had extended unification. For Netanyahu, the gamble collapsed. What became intended to humble a younger leader had emboldened a whole technology. What turned into intended as a caution to Africa had come to be a caution to anybody who underestimated it. Analysts in Western capitals described it as a miscalculation of historical proportions. But for thousands and thousands in Burkina Faso, it was easier. They had visible their leader refused to bow, and in that refusal they located their very own power. Hour 48 became no longer only a deadline. It had grown to be a symbol. A reminder that the electricity of an ultimatum lies simplest in the fear it evokes, and that when worry is broken, the equation shifts for all time. The 48 hours had ended, but the tale did now not fade. In truth, it changed into best starting. The streets of Ouagadougou still vibrated with chants days later, and the photos of defiant crowds rotated the globe. What were designed as an indication of Israel's reachhead was an indication of Africa's refusal. Yet in the shadows, the confrontation was far from over. Western media launched its second wave. Articles appeared with uncanny uniformity, Traoré's populism and perilous stability. Burkina Faso risks turning into a pariah kingdom. Networks aired pictures of discontent in villages that upon nearer inspection became out to be stock clips recycled from unrelated protests. Commentators whispered of hidden financial institution money owed and authoritarian glide. The reason changed into clear. If the ultimatum had failed at the front line, it would be resurrected in the courtroom of worldwide opinion. But this time Burkina Faso was not on my own. Across Africa, newshounds and influencers countered the narrative in actual time. Fact-checking collectives debunked falsified movies' inside minds. Independent stations broadcast live from Ouagadougou's streets, showing now not chaos but celebration. Even diaspora groups joined the defense, flooding international structures with a counter-message. Sovereignty isn't instability. Resistance is not tyranny. Behind closed doors, Africa changed into recalibrating. The Ouagadougou Protocol, once a draft debated in assumed tanks, turned into truth. 23 countries signed in Bamako, their leaders declaring that coercive ultimatums could be dealt with as continental threats. In Ara, prison pupils worked through the nighttime to draft enforcement clauses. In Abuja, Navy planners started simulations of collective protection. The ultimatum had inadvertently increased the introduction of something unprecedented, a political firewall against regime trade. For Traoré, The shift became as plenicultural as diplomatic. Young Africans who had once seemed abroad for possibility now seemed inward with a brand new sense of assignment. Murals appeared in Dar depicting clocks frozen at hour 48. In Johannesburg, hip-hop artists recorded tracks titled Deadline. In Kinshasa, filmmakers began scripting films about the 2 days that shook the continent. A symbol were born, and it was already reshaping identity. Tel Aviv, meanwhile, wrestled with silence. No invasion had happened. Now help materialized. Yet the harm became profound. Allies privately admitted the ultimatum had misfired. Some pressed Israel to retreat quietly to permit the memory fade. But the reminiscence did now not fade. It extended. Latin American leaders cited Burkina Faso as proof that ultimatums might be defied. In Asia, small states echoed the lesson. Sovereignty survives simplest whilst leaders dare to guard it. Even inside Israel, dissenting voices questioned the wisdom of attempting to dictate terms to a continent in movement. And then came the sudden. A Jewish-American journalist arrived in Ouagadougou wearing greater than 50,000 signatures, rabbis, survivors, peace activists condemning the ultimatum. At a press conference, he positioned the petition on the desk before Traoré's government. This isn't peoples against peoples. He stated, this is dignity towards domination. The gesture rippled via the palace and the gang alike, even in the coronary heart of Israel's allies. Resistance had observed allies of its own. The months that accompanied layered outcome upon outcome. Week 1, 3 African states renegotiated mining contracts, stripping out political clauses that had lengthy tied their fingers. Month 6, the African Monetary Union Superior, growing a fee channel denominated in African currencies. Year 1, the African Space Consortium released its first communication satellite TV for PC, reducing reliance on overseas infrastructure. Year 2, a new leadership academy opened in Kampala, education young politicians in the arts of dignified international relations, financial sovereignty, media protection, and countrywide resilience. Its capstone direction became known virtually because the 48-hour protocol in every nook of the continent. The ultimatum's failure changed into now not only a memory, it became an institution. Yet the maximum striking trade got here 3 years later in New York. Under the vaulted ceiling of the United Nations, now chair of Africa's Sovereignty Committee, stood before the assembly, delegates waited, conscious that his presence carried more than non-public authority. It carried the burden of 48 hours that had end up legend. He spoke, it appears that evidently his phrases measured however resonant. An overseas leader once gave me 48 hours to select among office and concepts. He believed a telephone call should bend Africa. He turned into wrong. No country, however robust or scarred, may additionally threaten elected leaders into submission. We are not anti-each person. We are pro-dignity, seasoned sovereignty, seasoned democracy. The corridor erupted. Africa rose first, then Latin America, then Asia, then small states. Scattered throughout Europe, standing ovations rippled in waves, not for defiance on my own, but for the precept that were defended. For the first time in reminiscence, the arena applauded Africa, not for compliance, however, for management. In that moment, the countdown had fully transformed. It turned into now not remembered as a hazard, nor at the same time as a bet. It changed into remembered as a lesson carved into the rules of a continent. Ultimatums most effective prevail while well known. Threats bind only while believed. Hierarchies persist most effective whilst consented to refuse as soon as, and the arena must reconsider its assumptions. For Burkina Faso, the lesson was clean. The ultimatum had expired. The president remained, and democracy tested in fire had survived. The ultimatum was meant to break Burkina Faso. Instead, it remade Africa. 48 hours of pressure had multiplied into 48 months of transformation. What commenced as a nighttime cell phone call meant to pressure surrender had come to be a rallying point, a cultural milestone, and a diplomatic shield. The closing date expired, however the tale lived on. In Ouagadougou, kids grew up hearing that their president had as soon as been informed to bow and refused. Teachers said the instant, no longer as crisis, Pa's lesson. Sovereignty is a duty, now not a present. Musicians carried the message into rhythm. Artists etched it into walls. Youth who once dreamed handiest of leaving now dreamed of building. A reversal of generations had begun. From resignation to delight, from flight to combat. Across the continent, leaders recalibrated their location inside the global. No longer merely reacting to outside dictates, they commenced to draft their own. Trade agreements shifted south and east. Infrastructure tied states together. The Ouagadougou Protocol stood now not just as phrases on paper, but as a continental safety net. The lesson spread: when Africa speaks in a single voice, no ultimatum can silence it. On the worldwide degree, the resonance turned into plain. Latin American delegates invoked Burkina Faso's stand of their personal battles in opposition to coercion. Asian island states quoted the 48-hour lesson while rejecting overbearing needs. Even within Western halls of energy, analysts acknowledged that a brand new grammar of sovereignty had emerged, one written in Ouagadougou, but examined the world over. And on the center of all of it became a fact that no cyber assault, no headline, no pressure ought to erase the strength of refusal. When a leader decides that dignity is well worth extra than survival, he turns into unpredictable, uncontrollable, unstoppable. When a human being's upward thrust behind that preference, they end up something even more. Unabi, the night Netanyahu picked up the smartphone, he thought he'd become turning in a warning. Instead, he created a symbol. 48 hours have become greater than a closing date. It have become a monument. A clock, a good way to all the time remind Africa and the world that worry loses its strength the instant it's far rejected years from now. Historians might also mark it honestly, because the ultimatum that failed. But for the millions who lived it, the which means runs deeper. It became the moment an empire's shadow met the light of defiance. The second a continent discovered that its chains were no stronger than its consent. The moment Africa stood no longer as difficulty, however, as creator of its future. And so the chant that started in Ouagadougou nonetheless echoes. We are not on the market. We aren't for give up. We are sovereign. 48 hours proved it. Forever will, don't forget.